In 2003, a 19-year-old Stanford dropout had an idea. What if you could run hundreds of medical tests with just a single drop of blood? No more needles, no more vials, just a finger prick, and you'd know everything about your health. It was revolutionary. It was going to change medicine forever. It was going to save millions of lives. There was just one tiny problem. It didn't work. This is the story of Theranos, the company that raised $900 million, reached a $9 billion valuation, and fooled some of the smartest people in America with technology that was complete fiction. By the end, the founder would be convicted of fraud and sentenced to over 11 years in federal prison. I'm the business historian. Let's talk about the biggest fraud in Silicon Valley history. Elizabeth Holmes was 19 years old when she dropped out of Stanford in 2003. She had been studying chemical engineering, but she had a bigger vision. She wanted to revolutionize blood testing. Traditional blood tests require drawing multiple vials of blood with a needle. It's uncomfortable, time-consuming, and expensive. Holmes proposed a different approach. A device that could run hundreds of tests using just a few drops of blood from a finger prick. She called her company Theranos, a combination of therapy and diagnosis. The pitch was compelling. If it worked, it would make blood testing faster, cheaper, and more accessible. You could test for diseases early. You could monitor chronic conditions easily. You could save lives. Investors loved it. By 2004, Theranos had raised $6 million. By 2010, $92 million. The company was valued at $1 billion without ever showing its technology to independent scientists. Why? Because Holmes was incredibly convincing. She wore black turtlenecks like Steve Jobs. She spoke in an unnaturally deep voice. She told emotional stories about her uncle who died of cancer and how better testing could have saved him. And she had a board of directors that read like a who's who of American power. George Shultz, Henry Kissinger, James Mattis, William Perry. Notice something? None of them were scientists. None were medical experts. They were politicians and military leaders. Impressive names, but not people who could evaluate whether the technology actually worked. By 2013, Theranos had partnered with Walgreens to put its testing devices in stores across America. The company was valued at $9 billion. Holmes personally was worth $4.5 billion, making her the youngest self-made female billionaire in the world. She appeared on magazine covers. She gave TED Talks. She was compared to Steve Jobs and Bill Gates. There was just one problem. The technology still didn't work. Theranos' flagship product was called the Edison, a small device that supposedly could run over 200 different tests on a single drop of blood. Except it couldn't. Here's what was actually happening inside Theranos. The Edison devices were unreliable. They produced wildly inconsistent results. Sometimes they'd show a patient was healthy. An hour later, the same blood sample would show they were critically ill. So, what did Theranos do? Did they fix the technology?
Nope.
They cheated. Theranos secretly bought traditional blood testing machines from companies like Siemens, the exact machines they claimed to be replacing. They modified them to work with smaller blood samples, but they were still using conventional technology. And for the tests that couldn't be run on those machines, they diluted the blood samples to make them work with the Edison. This made the results even less accurate. Patients were getting false results. People were told they had diseases they didn't have. Others were told they were healthy when they weren't. This wasn't just fraud, it was dangerous. Inside Theranos, Holmes and her business partner Ramesh Sunny Balwani created a culture of extreme secrecy. The company was divided into separate departments that weren't allowed to communicate with each other. Engineers working on the Edison didn't know what the lab technicians were doing. Lab technicians didn't know the results were being manipulated. Employees who raised concerns were fired. Some were threatened with lawsuits. One engineer, Tyler Schultz, the grandson of board member George Schultz, discovered the problems and tried to blow the whistle. His own grandfather didn't believe him at first. Theranos spent $400,000 on lawyers to intimidate him into silence. It didn't work. Tyler kept talking. In October 2015, investigative journalist John Carreyrou published an explosive article in the Wall Street Journal. The headline, "Hot Startup Theranos Has Struggled with Its Blood Test Technology." That was putting it mildly. Carreyrou had spent months investigating Theranos, talking to former employees, reviewing documents, and uncovering the truth. The technology didn't work. The company had been lying to investors, partners, and patients for years. Holmes denied everything. She went on TV and called the article false and defamatory. She said Carreyrou had a vendetta against her, but the evidence kept mounting. In January of 2016, federal regulators inspected a Theranos lab and found serious deficiencies. The company was banned from operating blood testing labs for 2 years. In July 2016, Theranos voided 2 years' worth of test results. Tens of thousands of tests had been given to real patients. Think about that. If you had gotten a blood test from Theranos in the previous 2 years, you were now being told, sorry, those results were wrong. Ignore them. Walgreens sued Theranos for breach of contract. Investors sued for fraud. Patients sued for endangering their health. The $9 billion valuation evaporated. The company was worthless. In September 2018, Theranos officially shut down. But the legal consequences were just the beginning. In June of 2018, Elizabeth Holmes and Sunny Balwani were indicted on federal fraud charges. The indictment alleged they had lied to investors about the technology, lied about revenue, claiming $43 million when they had under $100,000, lied about military contracts that didn't exist, endangered patients with inaccurate test results. Holmes' trial began in September 2021. Her defense? She claimed she had been manipulated and abused by Balwani, that she genuinely believed the technology would work eventually, that she was a young entrepreneur who made mistakes, but never intended to commit fraud. The jury didn't buy it. On January 3rd, 2022, Elizabeth Holmes was found guilty on 4 counts of defrauding investors. On November 18th, 2022, she was sentenced to 11 years and 3 months in federal prison. She is currently serving that sentence. Her earliest possible release date is in 2032. Balwani was convicted separately and sentenced to 13 years. So, how did this happen? How did a 20-something dropout with fake technology fool some of the most powerful people in America? Holmes' board was full of famous names: Kissinger, Mattis, Schultz, but none of them were scientists. They lent credibility without actually verifying anything. If your board of directors for a medical technology company doesn't include doctors or scientists, that's a red flag. Theranos operated in extreme secrecy. They never published peer-reviewed research. They never let independent scientists examine their technology. They claimed it was to protect trade secrets. In reality, it was to hide the fact that it didn't work. Real scientific breakthroughs are published and peer-reviewed. Secrecy in science is almost always a bad sign. Silicon Valley loves the mantra, fake it till you make it. Act confident, sell the vision, build a product later. That works for software. It doesn't work for medical devices. If your app crashes, it's annoying. If your blood test gives false results, people can die. Holmes tried to apply tech startup culture to healthcare. It was a catastrophic mismatch. Theranos raised $900 million from investors who never independently verified the technology worked. They trusted Holmes' claims, they trusted the famous board members, they trusted the partnerships with Walgreens and Safeway. Nobody actually tested the device themselves. Tyler Schultz and other employees risked their careers and faced legal threats to expose the truth. They were proven right. Companies that aggressively silence internal critics are usually hiding something. The Theranos scandal had lasting consequences beyond just one company. For healthcare innovation, investors became more skeptical of healthcare startups making bold claims. Regulatory scrutiny increased. That's probably a good thing. For female founders, unfortunately, some investors used Holmes as an excuse to avoid funding women entrepreneurs. See, this is what happens when you invest in women. That's obviously unfair. Fraud isn't gender specific. For patients, thousands of people received inaccurate medical results. Some made health decisions based on false information. The full extent of the harm may never be known. For Silicon Valley, the scandal exposed the dangers of hype over substance, of valuing storytelling over actual products, of prioritizing growth over ethics. Theranos wasn't just a failed startup. It was a case study in how charisma, secrecy, and the cult of the founder can create a massive fraud. Elizabeth Holmes is currently in federal prison, serving 11 years for fraud. The company she built is gone. The technology never worked. The $9 billion valuation was based on lies. But the lesson remains. In business, especially in healthcare, you can't fake it forever. Eventually, reality catches up. And when it does, the consequences can be severe. If you want to hear more stories of business disasters and corporate fraud, subscribe to this channel. We've got plenty more. I'm the Business Historian. Thanks for watching.